Breaking news, special counsel Jack Smith just returned a superseding indictment against Donald Trump. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. That was good. Today, special counsel Jack Smith announced a superseding indictment in former President Donald Trump's Washington, D.C. election subversion case. Marc, what is a superseding indictment? What does this all mean? What is going on?
Okay, so this is big news because, as you remember, Donald Trump had been indicted by a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C., one of four grand juries that indicted him. I know this is hard sometimes to keep track of because, it's not every day that you have a former president and a presidential candidate who's been indicted once, no less than four different places. But he was indicted on four counts related to the attempt to subvert and interfere with the 2020 election. That case then went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where Donald Trump and his lawyer claimed a form of absolute immunity. The Supreme Court ruled that he was entitled to immunity for his official acts, but not his acts as a candidate. And so everyone's been wondering, where do we go from here? Is there going to be like a mini trial? Is there going to be a hearing? Like, what's going to happen? Well, Jack Smith put all of that to rest today by returning the same four counts, just in a new indictment against Donald Trump. So this case is going to be ready to go forward, and Donald Trump's going to have no more excuses.
Let's talk about the actual differences between this new indictment and the original indictment. What changes did Jack Smith and his team make to comply with the Supreme Court's ruling?
Okay, so for example, gone are the references to Jeffrey Clark. I gotta say, I'm a little sad about this, Paige, because of all of the comically terrible, villainous people in this whole saga, you got to give Jeff Clark his kudos here. I mean, this is the lawyer who was like a civil lawyer, kind of an environmental guy who, like, lo and behold, emerges in the last days of the Trump administration as kind of the like, hey, you need a coup guy over at the Department of Justice? I'm your man. Well, that winds up dropping out, right? Because that would obviously relate to official acts. And Mike Pence, now we find out he was Donald Trump's running mate in the new indictment, right? So you can see Jack Smith is taking great pains to go through the indictment, and everywhere there could be an argument that he is relying on an official act, he is either removing it or he is making clear that really what he's talking about is the nexus to the campaign.
And within the indictment, it's repeated multiple times that Trump didn't have any, quote, official responsibilities, end quote, involving election certification and the convening of electors. So they're really trying to make clear what Trump did in relation to January 6th, to election subversion, was done in his personal capacity and as a candidate running, right?
Yeah, and I love the fact that among the things is the fact that Donald Trump's Twitter account reflected his personal views, not just his views as an official, but his personal views. And anyone who has followed Donald Trump on Twitter, or God forbid, on Truth Social, knows that the most charitable thing you can say about Donald Trump's Twitter account is that it reflected his personal views. But look, these are very, very, at the core of this case remains very, very serious charges. He is still indicted for conspiracy to defraud the United States. He is still indicted for conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. He is still indicted for obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. And he is still indicted for conspiracy against the voting rights and to have the votes accurately counted. So, there was stuff taken out of this indictment, and I don't want to minimize what the Supreme Court did here, but the core of the charges remain. His Twitter account's still in there. And yeah, Jeffrey Clark drops out and some of the other stuff, but this is a very, very meaty and substantial indictment.
Any of these edits change the substantive material of the charges? Like, is Trump charged with anything different? Are they approaching the case differently? Or are these just more changes to make clear that there aren't any official acts at hand here? It was all unofficial. He was acting in a personal capacity, acting as a candidate. Supreme Court, don't get involved. We're following the rules that you set.
Yeah, it's really more of the latter. And if you take a step back and you think about it, that's always what this case has been about, right? I mean, the case was never about his official acts. The case was about what did he do to encourage fake electors? He did that as a candidate. What did he do when he gave that speech, the morning of January 6th? He wasn't doing that as president of the United States. He was doing it as a political rally. What was he doing when he was encouraging, all of these activities and conspiring with all of these campaign and other non-official people? This was an attempt by a candidate to steal an election. This was not an attempt by a president to do something presidential. Quite the contrary. What he did was entirely unpresidential, but it was the illegal acts of a failed candidate trying to figure out how to not concede an election and how to overturn the will of the electorate.
Does this new indictment reset the case? Does it begin from the starting line again, or can it kind of pick up where it left off before it went to SCOTUS with the immunity argument?
Well, so look, one of the advantages that Donald Trump has, and you and I have talked about this, I have lamented it, that the role of the judges have played in allowing him to have delay. And I've written about it, and others have written about it on Democracy Docket. And please, by the way, if you're not already, make sure you subscribe to Democracy Docket. It's free, and the links to subscribe are in the show notes below. But we've talked about how he games the system for delay, that his efforts to delay these criminal cases is a type of victory for him, because his hope is he becomes president of the United States and then he orders the Department of Justice to dismiss the cases. So for him, delay is the game. Now, does this reset the clock? Unfortunately, yes, it does reset the clock in some respects. This is a superseding indictment. There'll be a new presenting of the indictment and the like, but it doesn't reset the clock entirely. There's already been a lot of pretrial discovery that's already taken place, and there's not going to be any new need for discovery. There have already been some pretrial proceedings that have taken place, and there's not going to be need for those pretrial proceedings. But we can be sure that Donald Trump's lawyers will challenge this indictment again on a series of grounds, including presidential immunity, that will then weave its way up the courts. This case is not going to move fast, and it's certainly not going to move in the next 70 some odd days, right? So this is going to be a 2025 discussion, maybe even into 2026 discussion about whether the judicial system is able to hold Donald Trump accountable. But we're only going to be able to have that conversation if Kamala Harris wins. Because if Donald Trump wins, he's going to put the kibosh on this entire thing. He's going to force this case to be dismissed, and he's going to throw sand in the gears in the Georgia state case. He'll even try in the New York state case, although I don't think he'll have success. And certainly, God knows, Paige, where are we in the Florida case?
Case got dismissed. Jack Smith has appealed that. It's in the 11th Circuit now. So, we're going to be talking about the literal trials and tribulations of Donald Trump for years to come.
Right, assuming that he doesn't win the presidency again, because then that Florida case, the appeal will end. He'll order it ended. This DC case will end, and it will be a tragedy for democracy.
So this case will likely go on for years, assuming Donald Trump loses this November. But what's the immediate next step?
So the immediate next step is going to be the presenting of the indictment in open court. Donald Trump will have an opportunity to again plead not guilty. I think the judge will excuse him from personal appearance. So, that's a pro forma step that his lawyers will be able to do on his behalf. The court will then set a schedule for what we'll set a trial date sometime out in the future. No one should get particularly attached to that trial date. Those trial dates tend to slip. And then we'll have pre-trial motions. And one of them is going to be the defense is going to test whether or not this complies with the Supreme Court's order. And that's going to be the big one. That is going to be the big hearing that I expect we're going to get a briefing and a hearing on. And that could go up to the DC Circuit and, God forbid, again to the US Supreme Court. And as you say, all of that is going to take time. But Democracy Docket is going to cover it every step of the way. If you've not already signed up for their free daily and weekly newsletters, do so now. The link is in the show notes below. Thank you for joining us on this special breaking news edition of Democracy Docket. We'll see you next time.